Letters from Spain. Letter 11. The European Way of Life. Hello, and happy belated New Year's to all 5 of my listeners. It feels good to be back. For this letter, I want to finally talk about something that's been on my mind a long time, and that's the contrast between the American and the European ways of life. I think this is especially relevant now, during our endlessly long election season in America, because this contrast between America and Europe has actually exerted a strong influence over progressive American politics, which are stronger than they've been in a long time. In fact, you could arguably boil down the progressive platform championed by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren to the following statement, that America should be more like Europe. So what's Europe like? One of the most obvious contrasts between America and Europe is healthcare. Spain, like Germany, France, or Denmark, has a nationalized healthcare system. That means that every citizen is automatically covered at all times, free of charge, or nearly so. Although, admittedly, some people do supplement their public health care with private insurance in Spain. This is radically different from the United States, where most people have private health care, and this health care is usually tied to one's job. So if you lose your job, you lose your health care. The difference is profound. In America, people really worry about the cost of health care. Even relatively well-off people worry about it. The cost of an ambulance is one example. If you pass out in the street and somebody calls the ambulance for you, in America you could wake up in debt. There's a famous story of a woman who fell between the subway car and the platform in New York, and she begged people not to call an ambulance because she couldn't afford it. She said she couldn't afford to pay $3,000. People go bankrupt in America because of illnesses and injuries, and that's something that's almost unheard of in Europe. It's not uncommon in America to see GoFundMe campaigns for people struggling with medical costs. And this isn't just a question of insurance. It's also because anything related to healthcare in America is absurdly expensive. A hip replacement, for example, is 6 times more expensive in the United States than it is in Spain. So that means that you could come to Spain, take a nice long vacation, and then get a hip replacement, and you would still save money. And medication prices in America are just absolutely wild compared to the rest of the world. Insulin is so expensive that some people try to ration it, and a few people have died in the process. So, there are a lot of reasons for the high cost of healthcare in the United States. One of these is bureaucratic complexity, which is necessary to deal with all the different private insurers. When you only have one government insurer, you don't need a lot of people working on the administration. Some hospitals in America need just as many administrators as hospital beds to process all of the intricacies of insurance claims. Anyone who's had to deal with American insurance companies knows that it is not easy. It is complicated, it can take a lot of time. It's a real mess. So another reason that in most countries medicine is much, much cheaper than in America is that the government buys medicine in bulk from the drug companies. While in the United States, every individual person buys directly from the drug companies. And in that situation, there's no bargaining power. So basically, imagine the Spanish government buying 100,000 shipments of a medicine for TB. They're going to get a better deal than if you yourself individually buy the medicine from the company. So anyways, I don't want to set myself up as some expert on healthcare, which I'm clearly not. All I can say is that I've never heard a Spanish person worry about whether they'll be able to afford going to a doctor. While in America, the financial costs of getting sick are at times even scarier than the actual sickness. Well, on the other hand, admittedly, I have had a bad experience with Spanish dentists here. They do try to rip you off, although admittedly, The vast majority of dentists in Spain are private and not public, so it doesn't really say anything bad about the public system. Well, speaking of health, another big difference between the American and the European way of life is our American eating habits. We eat a lot in America. A lot of food quantitatively and a lot of very bad food qualitatively. And as a consequence, obesity rates in America are over twice as high as they are in Europe. This tends to make us sick, which of course only exacerbates our healthcare problem. One thing that we Americans do have over Spain, at least, is that fewer people smoke in the United States, 15%, than they do in Spain, which is about 22% of the people. Spanish people like to smoke. But America definitely loses when it comes to physical activity. So much of our country is designed for driving. The average American walks less than 5,000 steps a day, as compared to more than 9,000 for the average Spanish person. This, combined with other factors like Spain's diet, led the news company Bloomberg to proclaim Spain the healthiest country in the world. The United States, by the way, ranked 35 in that list. In fact, the average life expectancy in America has been falling for the last 3 years. And a lot of that is due to what is called deaths of despair. And that's a really terrible thing to think about. Some of it is caused by drug addiction, the opioid crisis. And one reason that we have an opioid crisis in America is that it's being caused by the overprescription of pain medications. And the pain medications are being overly prescribed, basically because drug companies want them to be overly prescribed. So we have a crisis caused by our own healthcare system that's causing death, that's reducing the life expectancy in America. Anyway, it's crazy. It's crazy. So much for health. All right. But there are still more striking contrasts between Spain and the United States. A big one is maternity leave. Every European Union country guarantees at least 14 weeks of maternity leave, paid maternity leave. And many countries also give paternity leave. So that means that a new mother can take over 3 months at the very least to be with her new baby while receiving full pay and guaranteeing a job when she decides to return to work. I have no idea why this isn't more outrageous in the United States, where our government guarantees no days of paid maternity leave. Everyone likes mothers, but we can't seem to mobilize around this issue for some reason. And by the way, America is also unique among rich countries for offering no minimum paid vacation days and no guaranteed paid holidays. Spain, by contrast, offers a minimum of 22 working days off. That's a minimum, plus a mandated 12 paid holidays and an optional 2 more holidays per year that a local government can choose. So that is a huge difference. And again, I don't understand why there's not more outrage about this in America. Having vacation is really nice. Well, the last major contrast I'll mention is university. The cost of going to college in America is incomparably higher than it is in Europe. Even a public American university can cost tens of thousands of dollars per year. Student debt has become just a way of life in the United States, and virtually everyone graduates with at least a few $1,000s of loans that they need to pay off. Now, obviously, this has a huge effect, not only on our economy, but on the educational decisions made by the universities and professors. And it also influences everything from, what we study to the grade inflation that people complain about in the elite colleges and to the job choices that we have after college. Basically, if you're going to go to school and you're going to graduate with $50,000 of debt, you can't afford to study literature. You need to study something that's going to be remunerative immediately. Nor can you afford to take a year off to go explore another hobby. You need to start working immediately to pay off the debt. So you can see it has a huge effect. Meanwhile, in Europe, getting a degree is cheap and in some places even free. With a stipend, you might even be paid to attend a university. Probably not in Spain, but maybe in the Nordic countries. Well, as you can imagine, this also makes a big difference between how people live in Spain, what it's like to be a young person. When you graduate, there's not this intense amount of pressure. So there are lots of other differences between between Europe and the United States. A really big one that I didn't talk about is the strength of workers' unions in Europe, which, they're far stronger than they are in the United States, as you could see easily by turning on the news and learning about the situation in France. They have like one humongous strike per week, it seems. But anyway, all of this has combined to make Europe substantially more egalitarian than the United States tends to be. So here are some figures. From 1970 to the present, the share of total income going to the top 1% in America rose from 8% to 20%. In Europe, during the same time period, it also rose, but from 7.5% to 10%. So that is, in America, the share of the total income going to the top 1% increased by 150%, while in Europe it increased by about 33%. So that's a big difference. In the same time period, the share of income going to the bottom 50% of the population in America fell by 7% to 13% of the total, and in Europe it only fell 2% to 18% of the total. Well, what I mean is, in America, the gap between the rich and the poor has grown far wider than it has in Europe. Although in Europe it has gotten worse too, though not nearly as bad as in America. That's the point. So this brings me to the central contrast. In America, we talk about the American dream. That is our model. It's based on the idea of people, quote, making it, pulling themselves up by their bootstraps into another economic echelon. And of course, there are success stories in America. Who can deny it? But this narrative hides the fact that if you don't make it in America, then life can be rather harsh. Even more importantly, getting to the top is extremely rare. Besides the fact that having a highly unequal society, which means that there's less room at the top and more room at the bottom, America does not score particularly well on social mobility. According to the World Economic Forum, the United States ranked 27th globally in social mobility. That's not stupendous. And the top 13 countries, by the way, were all European. And the top 5 countries are the Nordic countries, which are known for their socialist policies. That is, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Sweden, and Iceland, in that order. Admittedly, Spain ranked just below America at the 28th spot. But the important thing to note is that in Spain, social mobility is not vitally important to well-being, since a robust social security program guarantees a relatively high minimum standard of life, and I mean relatively high compared to America. This is why I refer to the European way of life rather than the European dream. Because the idea in Europe, for the most part, is that a good life should not be a long shot, rags to riches, 1 in a million dream. It should be something taken for granted. My point in this podcast has not been to convince you with statistics. These issues are really, really complicated. And of course, Europe has its own problems, which any European person will tell you. My point is this. When Americans, and especially younger Americans, look across the Atlantic and they see all of these differences, healthcare, education, maternity leave, vacation, inequality, many of them naturally wonder why we in America cannot do the same thing if we are supposedly the richest country in the world. Why is America so exceptional in these rather unfortunate ways? I can't say I know the answer to this question. But I do know that awareness of this discrepancy is growing, and it has already had a major effect on our politics as more and more voters react with outrage and disbelief. Americans put up with many things that, in Europe, would cause mass protests. But will Americans continue to put up with them? That's the question. Thank you.